Dear Reddit, has anyone you've known simply disappeared? Under what circumstances? Was there ever any closure? My mom's boyfriend. He said that his mother was sick in another state and he was going to visit her. After a few days without hearing from him, my mom got worried and called his mother. She wasn't sick and had no idea that he was supposed to be there with her. We found all of his possessions, including his computer and camera and other valuables, as well as seemingly his entire wardrobe. Everything in a rarely used coat closet in our house. Police called my mom to say that they found his empty car somewhere in the forest near the Kentucky-Tennessee border. We live in Florida, but they called from a blocked number, and when she tried to find information about the case later on from other sources, nobody had anything on file about the car. My aunt was missing for a very long time in Virginia. I want to say several years. No one knew anything or heard from her, but her car was found on the side of a road near the woods. Key still in the ignition and doors unlocked. They found some of her remains a couple of years ago in those woods, and my dad was absolutely torn up. No idea of who or how or why. My father is convinced one of his coworkers just walked away on 9/11. The guy had a lot of financial problems, marital issues, and my dad is positive the man was walking down the street in front of him when the first plane hit. My dad was late for work. There has a memorial service, but as far as my dad knows, this guy's remains were never found. An old neighborhood friend of mine was living down in New Orleans with his girlfriend at the time. He had plans to go meet up with some buddies in Houston to see a football game. But first he wanted to take a bit of a road trip to go sightseeing in a small town on the border of Texas and Mexico. He never showed up in Houston. His family and girlfriend, quite obviously, flew into a panic and had the police on the job. The best they could do after a week of searching was find a picture that may have been his car, but they were really not much help. Considering he was visiting the border of Mexico, there was a good chance he was down there, which is not an easy place to find a person. I come from a strong neighborhood community, so there was a lot of support for the family coming from all directions. It's never easy losing a child, and the police claimed they had done all they could and that they'll keep an eye out. 3 weeks without a trace. He called. He was in a hospital 1,000 miles away in Mexico from where had been sightseeing. His hands were cut up. His face was bruised, and it took him days to remember his own phone number. He had nothing on him but the clothes on his back. As far as he could tell, he had been mugged and probably left for dead in a ditch somewhere. He has a spattering of memories of being on a bus and then being on the side of a highway and random places like that. His family flew down there and got him back home. I'm grateful he made it out in one piece, and for all the people that must have helped him on his way. There's no way he could have lasted 3 weeks south of the border in a state of delirium without help. A friend of mine from college has been lost at sea since late June. They're assuming it sank during a storm, but nothing has been found. Had a client at my law office whose middle-aged adult son disappeared without a trace about 10 years ago. Nothing suspicious whatsoever. All of his belongings were still in his house, even his shoes. No signs of struggle. No known involvement with any criminal element. No known people who had a grudge against him or would do him harm. He wasn't drunk, wasn't using drugs, wasn't mentally ill. Nothing. Local police searched the woods near his house with officers and dogs, dredged the local river, tried to trace his bank and credit accounts. Absolutely nothing came up. Very awkward moment. We needed to get his permission to sell a piece of property he had partially inherited. Had to get his mother to sign a sworn affidavit saying that he had been gone so long without a trace that she presumed him to be dead. How long had it been? At that point I think he had been gone about 6 years, which is why we needed the affidavit. After 7 years he would have been presumed dead by law. Friend's dad went missing almost 15 years ago in the middle of a nasty divorce. No warning. Just took the dog and his truck. No paper trail. It's assumed he either killed himself somewhere or started a new life far away. I was at a concert one night in Sydney, Australia, and I got into a fight with this British backpacker. He was ducked off his head on drugs. And the only reason why I didn't get kicked out is because the girls who he was inappropriately groping convinced the bouncers that I was only trying to stick up for them. Anyway, he vanished. And I was under police investigation because I was the last person to see him alive. I knew I hadn't done anything. But it's still pretty creepy to be told not to leave town until we get to the bottom of this. He showed up 2 weeks later floating in the harbor. He'd apparently had a massive blunt force fracture in his skull and fell into Sydney Harbor and drowned. His death was reported as accidental. But having your face on TV and hearing police are wanting to speak with this man is a little scary. My cousin did, but it's not particularly mysterious. He dropped out of college, moved in with his girlfriend, and just spent the days getting drunk. He stopped showing up at family gatherings, stopped returning phone calls to my uncle, and disappeared. He moved to a different state. We last heard he might be in Minnesota. My uncle keeps trying to get a hold of him, but to no avail. I stayed at my grandparents' house during the summer. They had a friend who played the guitar with my grandfather. They had met at a festival and had the same music taste. Anyhow, when I was at the airport heading back to my home country, I saw the guy. He said, "Hey, take care man. Keep practicing the guitar and tell your grandfather to do the same. I will be back." Been 4 years, no trace. He didn't even have luggage. When I was very young, 3 to 4, my best friend at playgroup was the son of a distant family friend. We were boyfriend and girlfriend. At some stage he just disappeared, and I forgot about him, passing him off as something my childish mind had made up. Then in high school I notice one of the office ladies says hi to me when I walk past in an almost over friendly way. I didn't think much of it because she was just really nice to everyone. You couldn't not like her. 2 years out of high school, me 20, I'm talking with my mum and sisters about school and I say how nice the office lady was. Mum says yeah she was, I can't remember the boy's name. Josh is apostrophe mum. I'm like who? And she explains that we were best friends in playgroup. Suddenly I realize I hadn't made him up. My mum tells me that he got leukemia and died, and that apparently he was asking for me in hospital, but they never took me, so I wouldn't get upset. I broke down and cried because it was so overwhelming. I get teary every time I think about him. It was so long ago, and I'd forgotten till then. TL, drive. Imaginary friend wasn't imaginary. I know a girl whose father disappeared. It's believed that his coworkers killed him and buried him in a construction site after he threatened to expose their corruption. But nothing was ever found other than his car, which had been wiped clean. Nobody could ever prove that they killed him. This happened in my town. I didn't know the people personally. A elderly couple 50s or 60s went missing. Just neither of them showed up to work one day. No clues, no goodbyes, nothing. It was all over the news for months until slowly they started to fade from memory. About a year later I found out what happened. There was a serial killer that had been working all over the country. He always went for the same thing. An elderly couple living in a house or condo with an attached garage. No dogs or kids. He would break in through the garage and kidnap the couple. This particular couple he drove to an abandoned house where he raped and killed and dismembered them. He left the bodies in the house, wrapped up in garbage bags. It turns out the house was scheduled to be demolished, and their bodies ended up in the rubble and eventually the town dump. They only found this out because they caught him in another state and he confessed to all his crimes and then killed himself in prison. Edit. Elderly was a poor choice of words. Older couple is more fitting. When I was 15, my brother, 8 years older than me, went missing. He had been overseas for a couple of years traveling and seeing the world. He'd discovered a love of sailing after a trip to Antarctica on a schooner and found a job sailing/transporting rich people's boats from the US down to the Caribbean. He and the others he sailed with made it down there and there was a party aboard another vessel. When it was finished, my brother, who was probably pretty wasted at the time, rowed another guy back to the guy's boat and then was supposed to row himself back to his own boat. He never made it. After dropping the other guy to his boat, he was never seen again. The dinghy was never found, and neither was he. That's as much information as I have. I don't even know for sure which island it happened on. Maybe Street. But St. Thomas. I was 15 and no one really talked to me about it. After a while I guess I just didn't ask because it would upset them. The whole family felt messed up to me. My mum was devastated. My dad went super religious and my other eldest brother, 10 years older than me, left NZ to go and live in England. Even now, 25 years later it still feels like a big hole, not knowing. Part of me likes to pretend he's still on an amazing adventure. I don't like to think of the alternatives. I can contribute one. I don't know why I was so excited. It was awful. I lived in a rum cooperative house one summer in the 70s. I called upstairs to Bev that dinner was almost ready and to come down. She said, "Okay, just a minute," and I went back to cooking. 20 minutes later we are wondering where she was, and Ian went up to get her. Bev's room was empty and the large window that opened like a door was wide open leading to the fire escape. Her keys and purse were still on her desk. Her typewriter was there with half-finished homework in it. I've never seen her since. It was terrifying. This was shortly after John Norman Collins, the Michigan murderer, had been put in prison, and it was very fresh in people's minds. The next year, they found a body in the arboretum. But it wasn't her. I think about her every once in a while and her picture is vivid in my mind's eye. One of my best friends from high school just kind of disappeared a few years ago. It was the summer of 2010, between our junior and senior year of high school, and his dad was making him get a job. So my friend spent hours every week for a month applying and checking into every job around his house that he could reasonably bike to. He had no car. The second week out of school rolled around, and his dad told him he was going up to Spokane, Washington to work for his uncle for the summer, since he couldn't find a job down in Oregon. My friend's mom and sister lived in Spokane. My friend had left his mom's house and came down to his dad's house in Oregon at the start of our freshman year, so he was familiar with the town. He had a godfather in Spokane that he would talk to and receive packages from time to time. My friend talked about the godfather quite a bit and held him in high regard. With this in mind, the story continues. A few days before he left, he had an argument with his dad and was trying to decide if he was going to stay up in Spokane or come back to Oregon to finish high school. When the second week of July rolled around, my friend was sent on up to his sister's house. He had all of our phone numbers and addresses, so we thought we'd hear from him. No one really heard from him, though. About the second week of August, he called me once and we talked for a while. That was the last time I talked to him. In early September I called his sister's house since I had the number at that point and learned that he had left. Apparently, his uncle had hired him full-time the week before, but my friend had fallen asleep on the job on the second day and had been fired. He came home that day, got his stuff, and left before his sister got home. My friend apparently ran off to his godfather's house. His sister said that his godfather wasn't actually his godfather. He was just a guy that ran a dojo that my friend had attended when he was younger. Apparently the godfather starting acting weird around my friend after a while, and his mom had forbid him from seeing the godfather. Since then we've learned from his family that this godfather guy runs something like a cult. He has no real dojo and just lives in an apartment with a bunch of dudes that got drawn in like my friend did. The guy has a few wives in Thailand and my friend's family is pretty sure that sexual stuff is going on because of the letters from the godfather that my friend left at his sister's house. No one knows if my friend ever finished high school. Since August of 2010, we've only heard from him once. One of my friends got the number of the dojo from my friend's father and tried to call it sometime in the summer of 2011. My friend had apparently picked up the phone, realized who it was, and said he had to go and hung up. No one's tried to talk to him since then. I still can't believe this went down because my friend never seemed like he was this weird when he lived down here. My father suffered from PTSD, manic depression and other conditions attributed to the Vietnam War. He would have episodes where he would just take off. It usually ended with him calling a week after he went missing, scared, confused and lost. This happened about 4 times when I was young that I remember. The last time he disappeared I was 15. It was December 16, 1996. We finally got the call January 7th 1997 that they found his body in a campground 3 hours away. To this day the holiday season is the worst time of year for me. My friend Don up and disappeared Memorial Day weekend of 2011. No note, no closure. He was the type to wander off. Sometimes, a real hippie. They ended up finding his body about 3 months later, less than 500 feet from his house. He hung himself in the forest. I miss him a lot. Check my link history for the articles. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.